Hey everyone, welcome back to the CxG podcast. This is episode 8. I'm one of your hosts, Games of War, and I'm joined by my co-host Corn Muffin. Joe, how you doing, buddy?
All right, how you doing, Josh?
Good. I'm doing well. It is pretty late. I got a big day tomorrow, but still here to do the episode and talk games with you, so it's all good.
Sounds good. So today we wanted to talk about Sega.
Wow, Sega, I don't know much about them. This should be a good one. Yeah, good old Sega, man. A company, near and dear to my heart, got me into gaming. Always been my favorite. I can't really say that to this day, like this day and age. They don't really do much. I mean, the Sonic racing games are good. I enjoyed the last Wii U exclusive Sonic the Lost World. Have you played that game yet?
I have not.
No.
I'm not a huge Sonic fan, actually. I don't usually play Sonic games because I'm not like a fan of platformers, and I don't really like the kind of racing element that's in there. So it's just kind of a
Yeah.
thing that I don't really play Sonic games.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was pretty good. One of the better Sonics in recent times. And I like the kart racers a lot. But the Sega I want to talk about, and I'm sure you're much more in tune with, was Sega of past. Like, what for you, man? How does Sega fit in with like your gaming past?
Well, actually, I think I have kind of a reputation as a Sega guy, but when I was a kid, I didn't have a Genesis. It was like the only system I didn't have, and it's weird because when I started, the first Sega system I played was actually the Master System, and
Okay.
by my house there was this kind of small electronics shop called Tokyo Shapiro, and it used to be a chain, but it's a kind of a regional chain. So if you know it, yeah, it's probably not though. But there, they had like one of those Master System display units where it had like 15 games in it, and you could just kind of play whatever game was on the list.
Okay.
And I would always go down there and play it, but I had a Nintendo, and I'd always go down and play the Master System when I was there because I couldn't get one, but I was always playing like Alex Kidd or Rocky or something on that just demo unit. And what happened was when the Genesis came out, a friend of mine actually got it at launch, so it came with like Altered Beast,
Nice.
and I was at his house the day he got it, so we all played that. And the Genesis was fun. I liked the Genesis, and obviously it was a huge step up from the Nintendo. And the it was a really good system, but for whatever reason, I had a TurboGrafx at that time. I got a TurboGrafx instead of a Genesis. So I played a lot of TurboGrafx stuff, and then eventually when the Super Nintendo came out, I got a Super Nintendo. So all of my Genesis playing was at my friend's house and not.
When you say you had a Genesis, was that conscious or was just that's what your parents bought you?
No, I chose the TurboGrafx over the Genesis. I had the option to get something for my birthday,
Uh-huh.
and they both came out like almost at the same time, and I went with the TurboGrafx.
What made you want to go with the turbo?
I just there was a lot of stuff on it that I enjoyed more, and nobody else had one. So it was the kind of thing where like if I want to play Genesis games, I can play at my friend's house, but if I want to play TurboGrafx games, nobody has one. So I just got the TurboGrafx, and like my friends would come over and play the Turbo, and then I'd go over to their house and play the Genesis or whatever. And
Okay. Kind of the best of both worlds type deal, huh?
yeah, it was that kind of thing where like I liked the Turbo a lot actually. There was a lot of good games on there, but it was obviously the least popular of the that kind of 16-bit generation.
Yeah, I never. One of my friends had a turbo growing up, and I remember playing like a lot of Blazing Lasers, and I think he had Bonk's Adventure, and the turbo was something that I always. What made me really start noticing that system was when they started running like the Turbo Duo ads, kind of towards the end, and it was Turbo Technologies, and they had the Air Zonk guy. I thought that looked really cool, and I thought the Turbo Duo was like an excellent looking system, like cosmetically.
I think the Turbo Duo actually won like a bunch of awards, like design awards for its appearance.
Definitely a cool looking system for sure. And it wasn't until many years later that I finally got one, but those have gotten pretty expensive, the Turbo Duo units. Like if you want one boxed, and a lot of the games are pretty expensive too for the Turbo. I've noticed that it's been going up. Well, everything's been going up, but Yeah, to get a nice box Turbo Duo, you're probably looking at a pretty penny, 400 or 500 bucks, huh?
Yeah, I think like the Duo is pretty expensive, but the Genesis was a lot more widely available, so it's obviously not as expensive.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that. As big a Sega fan as I am, and like the Sega guy, I never owned a Master System. My parents got a Nintendo for Christmas. I had two stepbrothers growing up, and they got the Nintendo, and we had games like Kung Fu and Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, and I played that casually. I wasn't. It didn't really. It didn't set my world on fire like a lot of the other kids. Everybody was playing Metroid in my neighborhood, and other. I did like Kid Icarus a lot. That was one game that really pulled me in. But on a whole, I didn't really go crazy for the Nintendo like a lot of people's stories that I hear. It wasn't until I got the Genesis. I had played it over a friend's house, and I was really impressed with it. And something about the system just really interested me. And I got one for Christmas one year. I think it was Christmas of 1990, and that's really when my gaming started. I was hooked, man. I loved the system. I thought the graphics were amazing. And I remember my grandma, like she didn't know much about games and stuff, and she bought me the power base converter. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And I plugged it into my Genesis, and then I was like, oh, okay. What do I do now? And like, it wasn't until I read, it's like it plays Master System games on the Genesis. So I've still got that thing like in a box some in my closet somewhere, and I need to start getting some Master System games. I had a Game Gear, which was I guess pretty similar in power and looks to the Master System, but I never owned a Master System or played many games on it at all.
the Master System actually it doesn't have that many games altogether in North America at least, and but there are a bunch of good stuff, a bunch of good games on there. Like Alex Kidd in Miracle World is a really fun game. I really liked that Rocky game, even though like it gets bashed all the time. What's it called? Black Belt was a pretty fun game.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of what else I played on the. Uh, Eventually, a friend of mine actually got the Game Gear also, and he had the converter for the Game Gear to be able to play Master System games. So we used to play it
Yeah.
on that also.
Okay. Yeah, I remember having I had the choice of a Game Gear or an Atari Lynx back in the day. We were on like a trip to Florida, and I remember it was kind of boring for me. It was mostly like a grown-up vacation, and I was bugging my mom, and she finally agreed to buy me a handheld system so I'd have something to do. And I decided on the Lynx, and I had like a bunch of games for it. I really liked the system, but having the Genesis and being such a big fan of the system, I noticed like a lot of the Sega games were coming out on the Game Gear, and I one day I took my Lynx and the carrying case and the battery pack and like 15 games, and I traded it all in for a Game Gear. And I'll be honest, like the Game Gear, it wasn't. I knew I made a mistake the second I did it, man. Something about the Lynx, it just had better graphics, and it actually had more games that I liked looking back on it. I mean, I had like Warbirds, which was like a 3D like fighting, like a plane flying game. It was just awesome on the handheld, and Ninja Gaiden, and I remember having Turbo Sub and a bunch of cool Lynx games. And as much as a Sega fan I am, I knew I made a mistake when I got rid of my Lynx for the Game Gear. Might not be a popular opinion, but I enjoyed it more, and I kicked myself in the ass for that.
I always liked the Lynx because it had like the kind of more more close to the arcade version of Rygar, and
Yeah, yeah,
it
yep.
had like Gauntlet 4 or 3. I don't remember which one it was, 3 or 4, with all the with the weird character classes. It had like nerd and jock and stuff as character classes instead of like warrior and elf or whatever.
It's funny how advanced that system was, man, for back when it came out. It was really impressive hardware.
Yeah, I remember
But
it being. I remember always wanting one. I never got one when they were out. I got one like later on off of eBay, but I don't even have one anymore. But it's the kind of thing where like I got it and it's just sitting in my parents' attic in the U.S. But yeah, I always liked the Lynx. It was always something I wanted, but never got when I was a kid.
yeah, it was a good time. But back to Sega. What kind of like tipped off this whole episode idea was I was playing some games yesterday. I grabbed a stack of games off the shelf and I sat down and I was playing like Comic Zone and I was playing Rise Star and Vector Man 1 and 2 and just, you know, thinking of these games when they came out. These games were all released in early to late 1995 and I think Vector Man 2 might have even been 1996. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but these games all came out so late in the life cycle of the Genesis. This is I think Rise Star came out a few months before the Saturn was launched, and it just totally went unnoticed. I mean, nobody even paid attention to it because everybody was all on the 3D hype train, playing the next generation systems, and it made me really think like Sega. I mean, when you look at Rise Star and you look at Comic Zone, easily some of the best looking games for the system, no questions asked. And it's sad that they came out so late and just didn't get any recognition, and it pisses me off when I think about that because here the Sega CD had been out for I think 3 years at that point, and not once was there one game built for that system from scratch by Sega, one of their studios, that really took advantage of the system. I'm talking all the parallax scrolling they could have done. You know, even if they wanted to do cinemas, throw them in between the levels and just have like a Genesis, like a souped up Genesis. That's what the Sega CD should have been, was like a turbocharged Genesis with, more colors and obviously better music. And I see all this effort that went into these late release Genesis games. Meanwhile, the Sega CD, and at that point, the 32X were just kind of sitting there on the shelves saying, hey, here we are. What are we doing here? Meanwhile, pouring these resources into releasing these top tier Genesis games at the very end when it's too late for anybody to notice. It just really makes me scratch my head and really wonder what the hell they were thinking.
Yeah, the thing with Sega at that time was that they just really, really lacked focus. I think they were really split between they had too much, like, too many chefs in the kitchen, as it were. There's a kind of you had what Sega America wanted to do and what Sega Japan wanted to do, and there was not good communication between them. So we ended up with a Sega CD and a 32X, and then like too quickly releasing the Sega Saturn. It was just kind of a mess, and they didn't really support the Sega CD in a way that they could have. But it's not the thing with that is that they didn't really develop the Sega CD in the way that they should have. They should have handled a lot more. It should have handled a lot more than it did, and it did handle some stuff. I mean, it did add a lot more power to the Genesis, but could would it have killed them to fix the color palettes? Would it have killed them to like focus on something more than just full motion video?
That's really what did it. I mean, we've talked before about this topic, and full motion video was very impressive in the beginning. I mean, I remember the buzz on Christmas of '92. I had Night Trap, I got Sewer Shark, um, and I think one more. I got Black Hole Assault, and I remember hearing like on the TV and on radio stations, people were just going nuts for this new kind of format on playing games, and I was swept up in it too. I thought it was I thought it was amazing. Never seen anything like it, and the problem with the full motion video games is once you play them and the shine wears off and the Christmas hype fades away, you're left with the game that, unless you memorize everything, you're going to fail. And there's no way to get better through skill. It doesn't matter how skilled you get, you're still switching rooms. The guys are going to be in the same rooms at the exact same times every time. You have to trap them or you're going to fail. And I think once that got through to gamers, because I mean, people aren't stupid. Once they saw that it was just trial and error memorization, it just took the entire luster right away. It just immediately was this is stupid, and everybody went back to playing their 2D side scrollers and platformers and racing games or whatever else. And the real eye opener was I got Night Trap, Sewer Shark, and I got Black Hole Assault. And Black Hole Assault was like it was a fighting game on the Genesis called Heavy Nova. And all they did for that was add some cinemas, add voiceovers, and a new soundtrack. It was a horrible, horrible fighting game, a 2D mech fighting game, and that was you know, at the time, 2D gaming, that was what people knew, and that was what was gonna, you know, that just goes to show the future blueprint to put something on a Sega CD, just shove it over there, put some music on it, throw some cinemas on it, and throw it out the door. You know, and that's the kind of mindset that took the system down.
Yeah, it's weird because like the Sega had a good model to go on for that because if you look at the way the PC Engine CD or even the Turbo CD handled the CD games, they were
Yeah,
they were really different from the way that the normal games worked. They did a lot of things that the other games couldn't do, or that they just handled the CD versions a lot differently because the CD added more memory, it added more things to do with the games. So you'll find
yeah,
like if you look at the later like PC Engine games, some of them look amazing. Like they still look amazing, um, and you'll find that it's because they used the extra memory from the CD player, and they used a lot of that the colors and the ability to load more sprites and whatever to make the games amazing. And there were full motion video games on the PC Engine. There was that kind of stuff, but they didn't focus on it. They focused on what they were good at, which Sega should have done, but instead they kind of focused a bit on the full motion video, and when that kind of tanked pretty quickly, they didn't focus on anything else. They just kind of left it dead in the water and went on to the 32X.
yeah, and they didn't get the sad thing is they didn't get the memo. Like after Ground Zero Texas, the next batch of full motion video games came out that next Christmas, which I think was the Christmas of 93, 94. And by that point, the full motion video games were getting more and more expensive. I think Ground Zero Texas cost millions of dollars to make, which doesn't sound a lot by today's standards, but back then, just to get these sets and all these effects and filming, it was a very expensive game to make. And by that point, people were done with full motion video, and they just kept releasing them and kept releasing them. There was Double Switch, Ground Zero Texas, a few others, and then even into '95, they were still focusing the Sega CD on full motion video games. And if it wasn't, thank God that games like Lunar and Lunar 2 came out, like Working Designs, and a few other companies that did some excellent shooters, like Core. Core Technologies was a great company on the Sega CD. They made a Chuck Rock kart racer called BC Racers, which put like Super Nintendo's Mode 7 to shame. The scaling and rotation was excellent on that. So it was obvious that it had the power. They also did a game called Soul Star, which was like a Star Fox on the Sega CD, which was much more advanced. And they were doing some great shooters. And it's just sad that Sega chose to focus so much on full motion video, even when they saw that it wasn't gonna work. They like you said, the Turbo. They made games. It's okay to do like a 2D game with cinemas and voiceovers and great music, but the problem with the Sega CD was they were all Genesis games just ported over, no enhancements at all other than music and cinemas.
Yeah, it's weird because there are a lot of games that did come that I can think of on the Sega CD that are good. It's just that none of them are made by Sega, and and almost all of them are Japanese exclusives. So it's the kind of thing where like I could be like, well, the Sega CD version of Shin Megami Tensei is the best one for the 16-bit games at least, and it is. But the thing with that is that nobody got that in the U.S. I can like Illusion City on the Sega CD. That game is amazing, but again, it's a port from the PC, but and it wasn't made by Sega.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think the only game they made from the ground up was Sonic CD. And it's funny, that's like regarded by a lot of people, myself included, to be the best Sonic game ever. But I mean, they never made anything built from the ground up. Give us those cinemas in between levels to move the story along. Have some insane 2D levels with tons of parallax scrolling. Have some scaling and rotation thrown in there. Just make a Genesis game on steroids, man. If there were more games like that for the Sega CD, I think things would have been a lot different.
Yeah, it's weird because I can think of a lot of games that I really liked on the Sega CD, but almost none of them are full motion video games, and almost all of them are kind of 2D RPGs.
Yeah, I mean, I love the system to death. It's one of my favorites of all time, specifically for the working designs games that kind of introduced me to the RPGs and got me going. Other games like Snatcher, excuse me, and the Space Adventure were both great. Um, but they just, even as late as 95, still pumping out excellent games for the Genesis. Meanwhile, the system that really could have used something, the Sega CD, and I won't even get started on the 32X. I think the longest development time a game for a 32X game had was 6 months. So every single game that came out for that system was rushed out the door. We'll never see what that system was truly capable of, due to the fact that it. I mean, the goal of a company is to make money, and what they put out is their reputation. It's on the line, and to release two add-ons, the Sega CD, I'll give them credit, got much more support than the 32X. But even with the Sega CD, there's wide reports have circulated that they didn't get the development kits out on time. Not a lot of people knew what to do, and granted, it was so early on that a lot of companies just didn't know what to do with this system. But it definitely had more of a chance than the 32X, where there was more powerful systems coming out on the horizon. This thing was rushed out the door. The games barely had any time in development, and that thing never stood a chance from the start.
Yeah, I always wonder about the 32X because the 32X, it seems like a bad idea all around. Like even when I was a kid, I thought like, who wants that? Like who is asking for this? And I only know one person who had one, but and he only got it because it was like on sale for $20 at KB Toys. It was like the kind of liquidation after the 32X like bombed. He had something, but I don't remember what it was because I remember having the 32X and having almost no games for it, but he just had it. Um,
Yeah, it was a joke, man, and I think it was made to offer an affordable jump into 32-bit gaming, which at the time, if you wanted to buy a Genesis and a 32X, I think it was still over $300. I mean, I think the 32X was 150 when it came out, and I think the Genesis was still at least 100, at least. So that's 250 right there. I mean, I guess it's a little more affordable, but when there's no games, it just there's so many questionable decisions that they made. Not even getting into the Saturn yet. Just between the Sega CD and the 32X, I just really wonder what was going through their heads. And it's really sad because the Sega CD could have been something that really, it could have really taken, Sega to the next level, which is funny because it's their slogan, welcome to the next level. But I don't think we ever got to that next level, man.
yeah, I think well, like what happened, like I said earlier, that their focus was really split. So you know, the Sega CD came out and they kind of focused on the wrong stuff, and then they just split their focus between that and the 32X and the Genesis. So it was a kind of thing where, like, later on, for example, again with the Turbo, was that when in the later era of like the PC Engine, like every game was a CD game. There was no Hue cards anymore. Like the Hue cards kind of just died out eventually, and
Yeah, that's something that definitely didn't happen with the Sega CD. It seems all along their focus was still the Genesis, which I can understand. It was a much larger install base, but how do you get people over to the Sega CD if you're not making any games for it?
yeah, well, I mean, I kind of see why they wouldn't support it because it did have like such a small install base, and the Mega Drive was it was like a distant third in Japan, so they didn't have anything to go with there. Like nobody in Japan was really going to be supporting it all that much, and nobody outside of Japan was buying the Sega CD, so it just kind of was in a position where I kind of understand why they wouldn't support it, but at the same time, I don't understand why they would decide like, I guess we'll focus on the 32X for a minute and then drop that also. Like it seems
Yeah,
like they could have taken the money they've spent on the 32X and put it into supporting the Sega CD to make people actually want to buy it.
yeah. I mean, it didn't. I think the Sega CD lasted from '92 until 95, maybe early 96 at best. So it wasn't very long at all. Um, like it, in Japan, it was they said it was like dead after a month after it hit, and it just I me being so passionate about the Sega CD, I've definitely been in the minority. Even on YouTube, I know there's people that appreciate it and like it, and there's people that are fans of it, but I don't find many people with the same level of passion for it as me, and that's just because of the working designs games and like the Snatchers. I mean, having really fond memories back then. Obviously, back then I was happy with it, but at the same time, I didn't really look back on it with the power of hindsight to where, I bought this system for $300 and I never really saw any real, point other than the full motion video games. And obviously the CD format really helped with RPGs. I mean, it was really nice to see nice full motion animated, and have voiceovers and nice orchestral music. It really helped for RPGs and even stuff like Snatcher. That couldn't have been done on a console at the time. It was Some of the games were really nice, but overall, shame on Sega for never building just one or two, three, hell, five games from the ground up that really took advantage of the system and gave us a supercharged Genesis. Shame on them for never doing something like that, and it'll always be like I wonder what will happen. And there's been a few companies that have made like the homebrew scene, but surprise, surprise, they've all been full motion video games, and I think there's one platformer, but I'll never see something for the Sega CD built from the ground up that really shows me what the system can do.
Yeah, it's kind of a missed opportunity, I think, and it's a sad one because it really could have been something a lot better than it was because it's the same thing actually. As a huge fan of the TurboGrafx, the TurboGrafx could have been like a whole lot better, but you can see how it could have been a whole lot better because if you look at the PC Engine library, it just none of that stuff ever came to the TurboGrafx, like in the US at least. So, you actually have the example of how it could have been better, but Sega doesn't have that. Where like in Japan the Sega CD was even worse than in the US. So like
Yeah,
there was almost no support, and then it just died off because it didn't sell well.
yeah, yeah. So it was that got me thinking. Playing these awesome games. Comic Zone is in my opinion one of the best 16-bit games ever made. I mean, it's like a living comic book come to life, and excellent beat 'em up controls. Collision detection is just perfect. Rise Star, super colorful. You can't even tell that the Genesis has the limited color palette by playing that, and even Vector Man pushing the pre-rendered, polygon looked kind of like Donkey Kong Country. And I'm looking at the date where these were released, and it got me thinking, where the hell are the Sega CD games at this time? The Genesis is being pushed to the limit here, and it's on its deathbed. Where the hell are these games when the Sega CD needed them? Just it got me thinking to how bullshit it all was. And then on top of these mistakes with the Sega CD and the 32X, what does Sega do? They announced at what was it, the E3 of that year or the CES, one of those conventions, they announced, "Hey, guess what? The Sega Saturn is in stores now." And that just proved to be the final nail in the coffin. A lot of people say the Dreamcast, was Sega's. That's the first good decision they had made since the Genesis. And by that point, the Saturn had already just destroyed Sega money wise. I mean, it did well in Japan, the Saturn did, but as soon as they announced that the Saturn wasn't the future, that killed all that momentum they had going. So the Saturn was just another just debacle. The system was, filled to the brim with off the wall components and processors everywhere and very confusing architecture, using quadrilaterals as opposed to the industry standard triangles for rendering their polygons, and it just proved to be a nightmare to develop for. And another mistake was made. Even though I love the Saturn dearly, it just was another mistake by Sega.
Yeah, it's weird because the Saturn was actually the Sega system that like I enjoyed probably the most. I got a Sega Saturn probably in '96 or so, And I got one after I got a PlayStation, but I found between the two that I ended up playing the Saturn probably more than the PlayStation One, only because um, I played a lot of fighters and I played a lot of you know RPGs and stuff. And this, not to say that the PS1 didn't have those. It's just usually if you were going to get a fighter, you're going to get it on the Saturn because it was always better. And there were different they had different RPGs the than each other, the PS1 and the Saturn. So I tended to play a lot of the Saturn with friends, and then I played the PS1 mostly alone.
Yeah. Yeah, the Saturn for me, once again, I was one of the very few people that owned one. My dad had come home with the PlayStation one day out of the blue, and once again, I liked the PlayStation a lot. I really did. But a buddy of mine, uh, I was at a buddy's house, and a kid came over and he had a garbage bag, and he's like, "Hey, you know anybody that wants to buy a Saturn?" And I was working back then like full time, so I always had money on me. I didn't have any bills. I lived at home with my dad, and I always had money on me. And I was like, "Oh, a Saturn, huh?" And he's like, "Yeah, I got one right." He pulled out of the garbage bag. He had like a Saturn and like two guns and Virtua Cop and a bunch of games. I'd say maybe 9 or 10 games, two controllers. He's like, "Yeah, $90 and it's yours." And I was like, "Damn." I was like, "All right, I got $80 on me. You want to do it?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, sure, man, sure." So that's how I got my first Saturn, and I took it home and hooked it up, and I don't know what happened, but I fell in love with the system. I was playing, Virtua Cop 1 and 2 with the guns, and I got House of the Dead, and I really loved Nights into Dreams and the Working Designs games. Once again, following suit from the Sega CD, I fell in love with Albert Odyssey and Dragon Force, and a stall. That those 2D visuals, man. There's never been a system that produced 2D graphics that has that certain look to it that the Saturn does. And I loved it instantly. It was my main system from there on out.
Yeah, it's the thing with the Saturn was like it did have kind of terrible 3D, and that was like another thing that Sega made a mistake on. There was that like they didn't put the kind of forethought into how the market was moving. So they made the system that was like a kind of better version of the Genesis, if you know what I mean. Like it was like a powerhouse in the 2D field, and they didn't really think about the 3D all that much. Whereas like the PlayStation, was like kind of had a better forethought of where things were going and made their system less 2D competent and more 3D competent. And it just kind of, you know, and I think, the market actually went that way. So people looked at the Saturn and they looked at the same games on the PlayStation, and the PlayStation ones obviously looked better at the time because it was built for 3D. And then, Sega would come out with some awesome 2D thing, and people would be like, we don't need this 2D stuff.
Oh no, no, 2D at that time was just it was not cool. It was considered like the past and dated. And it's funny when you go back and you pop in a game like a stall, that game is immediately playable, or even Three Dirty Dwarves, or instantly playable, looks beautiful. When at that time, 3D games, okay, they were ugly. There was, various camera problems. Going back and trying to play some of those early 3D games is horrendous, man. But looking at that, striking 2D art, it's immediately playable. You're not fighting with the camera. There's no pop in and horrible draw distance. I mean, those early 3D games are really, really ugly, not pleasing to the eye.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like at the time, those games were really what was popular. So like people would see those and they think this is amazing. We got to play this. And then like now when you go back, you look at those games that came out at the same time, something like a stall and or even in, like the 3D games also on the Saturn. So if you compared something to a stall to something like Clockwork Knight, it's not even a comparison. Like you know which one you want to play when you see it now. But at the time, everybody would have said like, we'll play Clockwork Knight."
Yeah, and the PlayStation, I remember when I first saw Twisted Metal, and that was a game that really like changed everyone around my area anyway. I mean, just being able to drive a car in like kind of like an open city and in 3D and cruise around and blow shit up and shoot other cars. That game right there instantly made 2D dead. You know, After that, nobody wanted to even touch 2D games, and that's where the Saturn excelled. And it's not always the case. I mean, I think technically the Saturn might be a little more powerful than the PlayStation if used properly, because some of those 3D games that people knew what they were doing and took the time to make them good, I believe they outperformed the PlayStation versions. I think like Quake or something, or I think even a few of the 3D games actually managed to look better on the Saturn, if I'm not mistaken, but it was just a lot more difficult.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's the kind of PlayStation 3 problem where it's more powerful, but it's got like a lot more difficulty in programming for it, so people didn't bother.
Yeah, yeah.
The Saturn had a lot of, the Saturn is probably one of my favorite systems, but it's not a perfect system by any means.
No, no. And I'm right there with you. One of my favorites for sure. And once again, it's just Sega with their. I think you got it perfectly right. Where it was just such a fractured process between Sega of America and Sega of Japan. And if you look back at the Genesis, it wasn't until Sega of America coming out and releasing Sonic and kind of having the Attitude campaign where Nintendo's like the kiddie thing and the Genesis is like the cool, hip, cocky, like attitude kind of thing. And I think if they would have listened to more of Sega of America input at the time, it would have fared a lot better in certain aspects. With the Saturn, though, they did have much more success over in Japan, and once again, they were still at war with what direction they wanted to go, Sega of America and Sega of Japan. And I think what kind of really says a lot is we never got a proper Sonic game on the Saturn, and at that time, people forget Sonic hadn't really had a bad game at that point. He was still like a major force in the video game market. I mean, Sonic 1 through 3, Sonic and Knuckles were all hugely successful games, and everybody was looking to the Saturn for the next big Sonic game. And we got Sonic 3D Blast, which was like a port of a kind of mediocre Genesis game, but it wasn't enough to tarnish the name yet. And we had Sonic R, which is now pretty classic with that soundtrack. And I liked Sonic R. And then we did get Sonic Jam, and that kind of gave you like a little. There was a. It had Sonic 1, 2, and 3 and Sonic and Knuckles on there, like all packaged together. But it also had like a Sonic Museum where you could run around in a 3D world as Sonic, and that's probably the closest thing you're going to get to seeing a 3D Sonic on the Saturn. And it ran pretty well, and it's pretty enjoyable, and it's kind of cool to see what Sonic looked like in 3D on the system. They had that Sonic Extreme game where there's you can see footage of it now, but it never got released. So that was a major problem too, not having a proper Sonic game. Even the Sega CD and 32X got Knuckles Chaotix obviously, but it's still kind of a Sonic game. So that's kind of interesting. The Sega is the only system up to that point to not get a proper Sonic.
Yeah, it's weird. It was weird because like at that time, Sonic was really popular. I mean, we had a really like good image with I guess like younger boys. I guess it was like super recognizable for them. So it was like the like one of the top recognizable characters in the U.S. And like they just they just dropped the ball so many times that Saturn was bound to kind of fail from the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Knights was probably their. I mean, I guess the choices are Bug, Clockwork Knight, and Knights. For a proper mascot. And I guess Knights would be the closest thing because that was probably the best game of the three. But I don't think Knights had the same appeal as Sonic. It was kind of a purple androgynous. You didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, and Mm. It was a great game, but I just don't think it worked as a mascot at the time when people wanted a Sonic
Well,
game.
like I think that idea is kind of outdated by that point. Like, by the time you got to that kind of era with the Saturn and the PlayStation One, the 3DO, and I guess even like the CDI and stuff like that, um, you're kind of past the mascot era. You know what I mean? Like, it's the PlayStation when it came out, they didn't have like a mascot so much as like they just had that kind of. Do you remember the commercials when the PlayStation was coming out? The "You Are Not Ready" commercials. Um, those things, they didn't focus on a mascot. They focused on stuff like Battle Arena Toshinden and stuff like that, where it was just like, you know, fast paced 3D action. It was like they were just like making it seem like it was too cool for like a kind of kiddie mascot type of thing. And when the PlayStation came out, can you think of what the PlayStation mascot was? Because I don't think there was one.
No, I don't. I do remember now that you bring that up, Toshinden. That game right there was what really separated the Saturn and the PlayStation. You had Toshinden, which looked by those standards back then looked amazing, and you had that awful Virtua Fighter for the Saturn. It was so bad they had to re-release that Virtua Fighter remix.
Yeah, the thing with that is like the only reason it was like that was because they had to jump the gun on the development. It wasn't like they remade it with the remix. It was just like the remix was the finished version. It was the thing where like all they kind of saw that Sony is releasing the PlayStation 1 and panicked, and they just released everything as quick as they could, which is like means everybody who was developing games like got bumped up to, or they kind of missed the release date, which pissed off everybody. And it also kind of screwed Sega themselves because, like, the people who were making games were like ultra rushed for their launch titles, hence the terrible looking Virtua Fighter. And when you see Virtua Fighter Remix, you realize, like, that's what it should have been when it came out. It just wasn't because it was rushed. And
Yeah,
that was a
how
bit, that actually, if Virtua Fighter Remix had come out at the launch instead of what we got, in comparison to Toshinden, it looks much better. And it was a popular game in the arcades. Like, people liked Virtua Fighter in the arcades, but when they saw the Saturn version, there it looked bad. And when you saw Toshinden, it doesn't. It's not that it like looked super good, but it looked a lot faster and better than Virtua Fighter at the time, at least on home consoles. And people were just like, you know, this is the system to get. I remember that specifically because all of my friends were like, you can't have a Saturn and look at that. We got it. Toshinden looks so much better.
Yeah, they really dropped the ball on that. And a perfect example is Virtua Fighter 2. That I stand by Virtua Fighter 2 having the best graphics of the fighting games on the 32-bit. And that game is really amazing looking. I mean, it really looks good. Maybe not so much towards the end. I don't even know. I think it might be the best looking fighting game on the 32-bit. I mean, have you played Virtua Fighter 2 lately on the Saturn? Just popped it in for,
Yeah, I have it. I've actually played it last month, but
it's a really good looking game. I mean, any doubts about the 3D of the Saturn, you take a look at that game and it looks very good. Very good.
yeah, that's the thing.
It,
It's not that the Saturn was a bad system or anything, and it's not like it couldn't have done 3D. It's just it was made to be too difficult to program for, and because Sega kind of pissed everybody off, nobody wanted to put in the effort. And when they themselves didn't put in the effort for the launch, it just kind of soured everybody on the system. Nobody wanted it after that.
and
And
what person would think that's a good idea? Releasing it so early like that. Okay, first of all, people that are making games that are going to support you, that are going to make you money in the long run, pissing them all off when they're thinking, oh, we've got till September, we've got till Saturn Day, September 2nd, and then all of a sudden it's released 6 months early. You're not ready. Your game isn't ready. That's where a lot of money is made is on the launch game because people buy the system. They splurge. They want to buy a bunch of games and that right there would piss off so many developers. It would piss off retailers that are going to have shelf space ready to sell your system. It was just a horrible, horrible move. Not to mention, still being $100 more expensive. And And you look at any system that are competing that are overpriced. Look at the PlayStation 3 when it came out at that absurd price of 600. Look at the 3DO, absurd price of I think 700. People don't buy it. Look as recently as the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox 360. That $100 difference was enough to get Sony amongst many other horrible announcements by the Xbox One feature wise. But that $100 difference is the deciding factor for a lot of people. I mean, $100 is $100, man. I mean, it might sound like, oh, it's just $100, but it makes a big difference. So you couple that higher price point, you add that with pissing everybody off by releasing it early, not having games ready. It was a recipe for disaster, and I don't understand. It hasn't really set in, I guess, because the Xbox One just made that decision last year. So I'll never understand some business decisions, you know.
Yeah, but the thing is that Sega was full of those kinds of decisions, which is really awful because how much I like Sega, and I think unlike like you said at the beginning of the episode, you're not really like a huge current Sega fan, but I'm actually a huge current Sega fan. They're like one of my favorite developers right now. Um, they in the place for example, in the PlayStation 3, they've made some of my favorite games. They made Valkyria Chronicles. They made the Yakuza series. They made I've just been playing all the Shining games on the PSP. There's so many good Sega games. They bought Atlas. They own Atlas.
You're right. Okay, let me just correct that real quick. I'm still a big Sega fan, but it's a different kind of fan. The Sega that I was when they brought out games like Shining Force on a regular basis, they brought out games like Comic Zone, Phantasy Star, Vector Man, Chikan, um, Cyborg Justice, even though that's not that good. But Kid Chameleon, Alicia Dragoon, just the sheer variety of games like Decap Attack, all these games that were released and never saw a sequel ever again. It was just a single game. Rise Star, the Beyond Oasis series, that got a sequel. But you know, the Sega of the past released so many games that could have easily been franchises, but they were just one-offs. You know what I mean? There was such variety and such just a quantity, but they were all quality too, man. And like the Sega of today, they have a much smaller catalog, but I don't know if it's just because they don't have the financial means to make games. It's a different market today too. You can't release a game and sell it to a niche audience over and over and over again because it's just so expensive. But I'm still a big fan of Sega of today, but it's just not in the same way that it was when they were cranking out so many good games and variety, like Toe Jam and Earl, and just these off the wall, Streets of Rage, and I mean, it's a different kind of love for them, but I still do, I still support them. I still do love them,
Well,
but
I
it's just not the
I
same.
think the problem with that now is that they don't have a reason to put out all that stuff now. I mean, there's no reason for them to do that. They don't have to, put out a million titles anymore because they don't have a system to support. I mean, it's like the only difference I can think of because there's not like a solid reason for them to have to create all these new titles and like hope that they do well because you know they don't have to support the Dreamcast 2 or whatever, or the Dreamcast 3 or whatever it would be at this point. But the thing with it is that like they stepped out of the hardware kind of hardware manufacturing business, and then they went to software only. And when they're at that point, they just got to think, well, we don't have to pump out all these games. We can just kind of create put our time into what we want to create, and hopefully it'll make money. They don't have to like
Yeah,
be as diverse,
support a
or
system.
they don't have to
Yeah,
like make all these games that are like showing how awesome a system is or anything because they don't have a system.
that's
There's
true.
like the reason I could think like, okay, like going back to our last episode that everybody hated, the like Nintendo, the another one of the reasons I can think of like Nintendo I thought had a bad E3 was that it was so Nintendo focused. And I know if you're a Nintendo fan, you're thinking, well, Nintendo was doing a presentation, they should be Nintendo focused. They shouldn't be Nintendo focused. Ubisoft should be Ubisoft focused in their presentation. But like, if Sony came out and showed only Sony games, you would have a problem. And Nintendo came out and showed only Nintendo games, despite other games coming out. And it's not healthy for their system. It's healthy for their company, like as a developer, but it's not healthy for their system because it doesn't show any variety. And Sega went out of their way to show this kind of variety by releasing all these titles that, like, they supported a bunch of companies to make these titles, and they published all these titles for their system alone to, show that, well, the Genesis can do this, the Saturn can do this, the Dreamcast can do this. And, now they don't have that kind of reason. And I think Nintendo does have that reason still, but they don't do it, which is, I think, one of the big reasons why the Wii U is doing so poorly.
Yeah. Yeah, point well taken, man. And which brings us to the Dreamcast, and I think the Dreamcast is the last time that I was like completely like wowed by graphics. I mean, not that the first time I saw like HD consoles like the Xbox 360 and I saw Cameo, I was pretty blown away. But something was different when I saw the Dreamcast for the first time. When I first saw Soul Calibur and even Sonic Adventure and Ready to Rumble and Hydro Thunder, I think that will be the last time that I'm really impressed by console graphics. Just those high resolution. It was like I thought to myself, man, games cannot get any better looking than this. Like this is it, And maybe it was just the time. I don't know. It just the Dreamcast was so impressive, and it's like by that time they knew what they were doing. They were focused. They were ahead of the game with the online play. They knew what the future was. They just unfortunately ran out of money from all their past bad decisions,
Yeah, that's
and
the thing. The Dreamcast is the worst mistake by Sega, not because they made any mistakes with it, but because, like, it just they didn't do it was like the end result of the culmination of all their mistakes. Like, they learned from all those mistakes, but then it just they ran out of money for it. It was the kind of thing where, like, the Dreamcast did virtually everything right. I mean, it was so ahead of its time. You know, it had everything you could want for your console. It had, focus on multiplayer games. It even had 4 controller slots sitting on it. It had the first kind of real implementation for out of the box of online play for a console. It had, it had a ton of games like that were well developed by Sega, and it had, all types of stuff that it was working on. And I think, like, the only thing I can think of that was a downside for the Dreamcast was that it didn't have a DVD player.
yeah, that was a big deal. That was a big deal because DVD players at that time were expensive, and it was a big deal at that time because DVD players were blue. Okay, yeah, a bit better of a picture, but when DVDs hit, it was a better picture, it was better sound. You no longer had to rewind. You no longer had to worry about. You could jump from scene to scene. There was extras. I mean, DVD was the big from VHS, and everybody loved it. It caught on instantly. It made VHS obsolete immediately. It was expensive, and paying $300, you not only got a new state-of-the-art video game system in the PS2, but you also had a DVD player right out of the box, and that was a big deal. That was a very big deal for the PS2.
That was a huge deal for the PS2, and I think, like, that was like one of the main reasons that the Dreamcast didn't succeed, I think. And it sounds stupid now because, like, people will think like everything is a DVD player and they're so cheap, but like at that time when Sony announced that the PlayStation 2 was going to also be able to play DVDs, that was it. Everybody I knew was like, well, I'm not going to get a Dreamcast. I'm just going to wait for the PlayStation 2 because it'll also have DVDs. And, like, I know a ton of people who got the PlayStation 2 exclusively to play DVDs. Like, people who didn't play games were buying it to get the DVD player because it was cheaper than buying a regular DVD player.
It was, and that was. I think the PS3's only saving grace at launch was that it was a cheap Blu-ray player for people that wanted high definition movies. I know a lot of people that bought a PlayStation 3 just for a Blu-ray player because even though $600 is a lot of money at that time, it was still the cheapest Blu-ray player out. And but yeah, not so much as the PS2. That was such a huge deal,
it
and it was
it really was a huge deal, and I think, like, everybody at the time, like when you're back at that time and you're talking to people about it, everyone was like, "Yeah, this Dreamcast is pretty awesome, but it doesn't have a DVD player." Everybody said that. Everybody. It was the kind of thing where like it should have done it should have been better than it was. And I remember when it announced and when it came out, I thought like it's awesome, but it seems like Sega always wants to release something a little too early, and it never catches on because 1 year later something better will come out and everybody will hop on that instead.
Yeah, I mean that's the system they got right, but it's too little, too late. Unfortunately.
Yeah, it's really sad actually because the Dreamcast is like a pretty awesome system. It still has a lot of games that are exclusive to it that are well worth going back to play. Before we started recording this podcast, I was actually playing the Dreamcast. I was playing Mach X on the Dreamcast, and
Oh, nice.
the thing with this is that the Dreamcast really was just kind of sent out to die. It was sent out and like it didn't do that well, and I'm sure that like it didn't do all that well solely because of the DVD player thing. But
And just to add, I think a lot of the reason that held it back was people were so burned by Sega. They were burned by the Sega CD. They were burned by the 32X. And at that point, to non-Sega fans, they kind of became a joke, man. I mean, people that bought a Saturn that were willing to give Sega that last chance, the system lasted for 3 years. It was dead within 2.5 years. 3 years. At that point, yeah, you wanted a Dreamcast because you loved Sega, but at that point they had made so many mistakes. A lot of gamers went on to more reliable, safe bets, like either the PlayStation or the 64 or
well,
whatever was else out at the
the
time.
64 wasn't a safe bet.
Yeah, no, no, but to Nintendo fans, I mean, it just
But hey,
by the time
even
Dreamcast,
to Nintendo fans, like the Nintendo 64 is like straight up the worst Nintendo system. Like my least favorite system ever, pretty much. But it didn't have the games like there weren't. Where was the Fire Emblem? Where was the Metroid? Where were those games? Like it only has Mario and Zelda on the Nintendo 64, maybe a Kirby, but like this, um, God, Nintendo 64 is it was so awful.
yeah, I'm with you on the 64. Like, I had one back. I think I got one for Christmas at some point, and I remember really enjoying the wrestling games, like the wrestling games. But we all played those multiplayer. But some of the things I couldn't get past on the 64 was the amount of fog in a lot of the games, the fog, and not being like a Super Nintendo guy or like super into Nintendo. It was just more of the franchises that I had known. I mean, the Banjo Kazooie games were good. I did like those, but they just boiled down to like collectathons. All the platformers on the 64 were just giant collectathons.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like the Nintendo 64 had like essentially two types of games. It had 3D platforming collectathons and racing games. And then like that's it. Like if you don't like those two genres, which I don't, you're out of luck unless you're like a huge fan of like Zelda, I guess. And the thing with that is like I don't even those are my some of my least favorite Zelda games, the Nintendo 64 ones. And I've played a lot of Zelda games, but like um virtually virtually everything on the Nintendo 64 is awful to me. I have no nostalgia for the N64, though I had one. I had one when it came out, and I bought a bunch of games for it. But seriously, like my least favorite system.
Yeah, the no RPG thing is what really killed it for me. I mean, I when I had the system, I think I tried that Quest 64, and I was just like, okay, that's enough for me. This is it. It didn't do it for. I mean, I'll admit, like Zelda was highly impressive to me because I do like Zelda, but at the same time, it was such a big open world, but it was just so empty, kind of. I mean, it's like the Nintendo 64 was trying to show how big and vast areas could be, but they were filled with nothingness. I guess the technology wasn't there yet. But I mean, it's cool to have these giant, expansive worlds. But if there's nothing to do other than just to get from point A to point B, it's kind of pointless.
Yeah, and like it's weird because at the same time as the Nintendo 64, like well, actually not at the same time, just a little later came the Dreamcast that showed like how to do those things right. You know, you got something like Shenmue. You don't have anything equivalent to that pretty much anywhere.
No,
And that was
no,
like a, you know, it's not as populated as a world as things are now, but like at the time it was amazing. You know, it
oh
had
yeah,
day night cycles, it had weather cycles, it had all types of like just big open world areas to run through.
yeah. I still remember finishing that game, man. I at home, I beat it, and you're riding that motorcycle at night with the girl in the back seat, man.
You got
I'll never forget.
the 100-man battle. That's the
Yeah, I'll never forget that, man. It was like an open world game with a Virtua Fighter battle system, and I was hyped for that game through the roof. And none of my friends, like, what the hell are you talking about, Shenmue? What is this, you know? And I brought it over and tried showing them, and it's not one of those games where you can turn it on and impress people. It's a slow moving game. I mean, sure, the graphics look great for the time, but it's slow moving. It's not like pop in and be amazed right away. You have to sit down and get into it. And it's very Japanesey. The dialogue is kind of cheesy, so it didn't convert any of my non-believer friends, you know.
yeah. That's the thing though. It's such a spectacular game. Like I think it's like just shows the kind of how Sega learned everything from the past generations and kind of tried to fix it all with the Dreamcast. It just they put out such amazing stuff. They put out all types of new styles of games, things we hadn't seen before. Things like things like Shenmue, things like Crazy Taxi, like that became like a genre unto itself almost.
Yeah, I'll never forget playing Seaman for the first
Yeah,
time.
Seaman. That game was something entirely new. You had stuff
Yeah.
like Jet Set Radio. You know that
Yeah, the first cell shaded game. Wasn't that the first, I believe?
it might have been. I don't know.
I think it introduced cell shading.
But it was all of those games were like amazing. You had stuff like Space Channel 5. Like, that was like one of the more popular kind of music rhythm type games too. They did so much that it was it's baffling to me at how poorly the Dreamcast did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Sega's past mistakes catching up with them and a lack of DVD player. I mean, the price was right. There was great games. It just couldn't hold up when the PS2 hit, and it's sad. It's Sega, man, I just think a lot of the problem was just miscommunication between Sega of Japan, Sega of America, and a lot of poor decisions, and it's a sad thing. Um, Guys, we gotta wrap this episode up. I've got to be to work in 5 hours, and I'm sure we could sit here and talk all night. But the question I want to leave with you, Joe, I want to ask is, do you think that Sega will ever make another home console?
For me, I seriously doubt they would ever try unless um, a bunch of people left the console market for some reason. It doesn't make any sense for them to at this point. Not because they couldn't do it. Um, you know, recently, recently they've been talking about Nintendo's like net holdings. They have about 10 billion in holdings. Sega has 9 billion in holdings. They're not that far off. If people think like Sega can't make another system, you're probably mistaken there because they have a lot of money in holdings at the moment, and they're profitable.
Yeah, and that's not even taking into account what if they launched a Kickstarter or some crowdfunding. That's like the go-to thing these days, you know.
But the thing is like there's no reason for Sega to make a new console. There's already a lot of consoles on the market. There's three, and the thing is like a fourth console. Do you see? I couldn't see that doing well.
No, it's
And
just too crowded.
yeah, it's like you know when have we ever had 4 consoles doing well? When have we ever had 3 consoles doing really well? It's like last generation only. That's that's about it. I mean, you had
Yeah.
the 16-bit generation, you had the Turbo, the Genesis, and the Super Nintendo, but the Turbo was like not doing well ever. And
No.
32-bit generation, you had what? You had a ton of systems, but none of them were doing well except for the Super Nintendo and the not the Super Nintendo, the PlayStation. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not like the
They'll never be
N64 was
another.
like blowing people away with its sales, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Saturn didn't do well at all. And then you got like all the other ones like the Jaguar and the 3DO and the CDI and all of those. They didn't even make a dent. And then
No.
after that, you had the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox and the Dreamcast, I guess, and the GameCube. And the GameCube so far is Nintendo's worst selling console. It didn't do well at all. Um,
Yeah.
and then the Xbox did all right, but comparatively to the PlayStation 2, nobody did well except the PlayStation 2.
Yeah.
And then last
Yeah.
gen, we had, of course, the Wii did spectacularly, and so did the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. They all did well.
Yeah.
But this generation,
They all did well.
we're back to two doing well again.
Yeah.
Even that might be
And
debatable at this point.
it's funny you look back. There never will be another time like the mid '90s where you've got Nintendo, Sega, and Sony, and Atari, and Panasonic,
In NEC, yeah,
and Philips.
you had the Neo Geo also. You had all of that stuff.
Yeah, you'll never see a time like that again, where there's all these systems. It's just, I mean, people talk about a crash. Like I remember hearing, oh, there needs to be another crash. There needs to be another crash. And if there was ever a time to be a crash, video games will never crash again. I don't care what anybody says. The mid '90s would have been the time where there was just kind of an oversaturation of systems, and but I'm with you. I don't think that Sega will ever make another system again. Like you said, there's no need to, and it's just gotten to the point where everything is so expensive to make games, and I just don't see them. I wish them nothing but the best making games, but I don't think that there'll ever be a new console.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen. I don't. They don't have a reason. There's no reason for the Sega to make a new console, even if
No.
like people wanted, even if they wanted to make a new one. And I have no doubt that they could. I just think there's no reason to. There's not a reason for them to make something new.
Well, guys, it's been fun checking in once again. Next podcast, we'll get together earlier, so we can talk a little longer. It's just getting so late now, but get a hold of earlier so we can go on for longer. Um, it's been fun, Joe, as always.
All right, so I guess that will be the end of this episode, episode 8, where we talk about the the negative sides of Sega, I guess.
Yeah, you guys take it easy. Thanks for the continued listening, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
See you guys next time.